Today we're going to have a look at using upper and lower bounds to solve problems. And there was an exam question on this that wasn't particularly well answered recently, which is why we're looking at this today. So, state the upper and lower bounds for each of the following. So we've got 38 centimetres to the nearest whole number. So one way to think about this is to draw yourself out a little number line. If I've got 38 centimetres, then if it's to the nearest whole number, then the whole numbers either side of that will be 39 and 37. So it makes sense that the upper and lower bounds are going to be in between these, going to be halfway in between here. So in which case, for this one, the lower bound would be halfway between 37 and 38, which would be 37.5, and the upper bound would be halfway between 38 and 39, which is 38.5. So those are the upper and lower bounds, and it's always plus and minus a half of the units that are being used. So next one, if I've got £450 to the nearest 10, well, 10 less than that would be £440. So halfway in between 440 and 450 is going to be my lower bound, which will be £445. And the upper bound will be 450. The next 10 up would be 460. So halfway in between those two would be 465. 165.5 kilograms to the nearest one decimal place. Well, again, if you need to draw yourself a little picture, if I've got to one decimal place, I've got 165.5, and then the next one down would be 165.4, and one up would be 165.6. So I've just got to find halfway in between those again. So the lower bound will be halfway between 165.4 and 165.5, which will be 165.45. And the upper bound will be halfway between 165.5 and 165.6, which is 165.55. Running out of space here. Final one, 405.65 to the nearest two decimal places. So two decimal places, well, if I go down one, I've got 405.64. So halfway between 405.64 and 405.65 must be 405.645. And the upper bound is going to be halfway between 405.65 and 405.66, which will be 405.655. So now we need to use that to answer some problems. What are the upper and lower bound areas to the nearest one decimal place? What that means here is that the measurements here have been given to the nearest one decimal place. So we need to work out the upper and lower bound areas, the highest and smallest it could possibly be. So to do that, we need to work out the lower bounds and upper bounds first of all for each dimension. So the lower bound of 10.1 to the nearest one decimal place, well, 10.1, one decimal place down would be 10.0. Halfway between that and 10.1 will be 10.05. If it's 4.1, one down would be 4.0, so halfway between is 4.05. And the upper bounds, 10.1, next one up would be 10.2, so it's going to be 10.15. And 4.1, one up would be 4.2, so it's 4.15. So how do I work out the upper and lower bound areas? Well, the lowest I could possibly get would be by multiplying the two smallest numbers together, the two lowest bounds multiplied together. So that would be 10.05 times 4.05. And the upper bound, you should be able to spot, is just going to be the two biggest numbers multiplied together. So 10.15 multiplied by 4.15. So you can work those two out on your calculator. This one gives us 40.7025, and the upper bound is 42.1225. Next one, and this is another level of difficulty, this, and you'll see why in a second. Kathy drove 238 miles correct to the nearest mile. She used 23.7 litres of petrol connected to the nearest tenth of a litre. So we've got two different units involved here. So this is how you work out petrol consumption and work out the upper bounds for the petrol consumption. Now don't be fooled into thinking that you only need to find the upper bounds to begin with, because we're going to need both of them here. So first of all, let's find the upper bounds and lower bounds of each of those, like we did a second ago. And we've got 238 and 23.7. Right, so it's 238, and that's to the nearest mile. 1 mile down will be 237, so the lower bound's got to be 237.5. So the upper bound's going to be 238.5. Next one, the units here are in the tenth of a litre, so that's effectively to the nearest decimal place. So one decimal place down would be 23.6, so halfway in between those will be 23.65. One decimal place up from 23.7 would be 23.8, so the upper bound is going to be 23.75. So let's go back to the formula for working out petrol consumption. We're looking for the upper bound here, so the highest possible answer that we're going to get from these numbers here in this grid. So number of miles travelled divided by number of litres travelled. Now, to do that, to get the biggest possible answer, I need the number on top to be as large as it possibly could be. So the number of miles travelled has to be this upper bound here, 238.5. But because I'm dividing, in order for petrol consumption to be as big as possible, I need this number on the bottom to be as small as I can possibly get it. So I'm going to use the lower bound on the bottom. This one here. And when I put that into my calculator, that will give me the upper bound for petrol consumption, which is 10.08 to 2 decimal places.